Okay, everyone, good afternoon. My name is Roberta, and I am talking to you from London. I'm really sorry if you hear some noise. We are right on Oxford Street, and there's work taking place on the street right outside. So it's been a bit noisy for the past couple of days. I hope you can hear me well. What you can do, type in the chat if you don't. Okay, so I'll just send you a message to everyone. If you can't hear me, let me know. Okay, it doesn't really matter if you can't see me. I'm not a top model, so it's not important. Okay, what is important is that you get my voice and later the documents and the material that I will be sharing with you. All right. Brilliant. Okay, so I have a hello from Emanuele. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, and I can also hear you. Brilliant. Yes, okay, so I'll just introduce myself very briefly. I think if Roberta is here, she knows me, she's seen me before. The same with Emilia. Yes, I'm the Director of Studies of Rose of York Language School. I've been working here for about 4 years in this position. Before this, I used to teach IELTS. And before IELTS, I used to teach general English, and I taught in other language schools and so on. Okay, just so that you have a little bit of background. Thank you very much for sending your needs analysis. I had a look at them and I took the most popular topics. And the ones that, as I said, were the most popular are the one that I'm presenting today, which is teaching reading and listening skills. Some of you wanted to also focus on speaking skills. And as for Thursday, the third session, we'll see what to do. Okay, so brilliant. Now, right next to me, I have an IT technician who will help me do this because it's the first time I deliver such a lecture. Okay, so if I get stuck, you will see someone taking over. Okay, his name is Eric. And I might actually ask him questions. So now, this is what I do, right? Yeah, share. Okay. Oh, I can see you. Brilliant. All right, so you should now see on your computer or your laptop or your phone the first slide. Is everybody okay with that? Okay, so teaching reading and listening. So hopefully by the end of today's session, what you will have, say, learned or discussed and seen, definitely have a clear understanding of the structure and the key elements in a typical reading or listening lesson. A basic understanding of the pedagogic rationale underlying this structure. So what happens when we conduct a reading or listening session, and an overview of different reading and listening skills, and a range of different tasks that can be used to develop these skills. So, the first thing I would like you to do is just quickly to think about 5 things you have read and listened to today, so far today. So just quickly think about that. 5 things that you have read and 5 things that you have listened to. I'll give you a minute to think about it. Okay, so can anyone maybe type or tell me things you have read or listened to today? Okay, no problem. Yes, so things that you might have listened to or read today, for example, are things that have to do with your phone. Okay, so a text message, a phone call. You might have listened to the radio while you were driving to work, or you might have listened to a conversation on the train or on the bus, maybe between a couple of people or a group of people. You might, or you have certainly listened to a member of your family or people you live with telling you something or shouting at you, maybe if you have kids. You might have listened to, or certainly have listened to your students. Things you might have read, again, okay, text messages, maybe the news in the newspaper, on your tablet, on your phone. Your lesson plan for today, some material that you had to teach today, things like that, or maybe a letter that you got through the post this morning, things like that. Okay, so the important thing that we need to think about is that okay, sorry, is that can you see the screen? Yes, here we are. Okay, so the important thing you have to think about is that when you do listen to something or you read something, it's because you have a purpose. Okay, there is a reason why you are reading or listening to something, and this is the important part of when you start a reading or a listening lesson with your students. You have to read or listen to something for a purpose. Okay, I know it's a stupid thing to to remind you, but that's why we do it. Okay, and that's one of the things that kind of motivates the students. A lot of you wrote in your needs analysis said that you want to know how to motivate students, and this is one of the things that you should be doing, which is give them a task. So when there is a reading lesson or a listening lesson, a task is the most important thing. So why, teacher, why are we doing this? You know, why do I have to read this thing about history or food science? Why? What's the purpose? Okay, so reason, a task. Now we're going to look in a minute at the structure, so the key elements of a reading and a listening lesson, which is this one. Ta-da! I have just been paused for a second. All right. Are we back to normal? Yes, back to normal. Very good. Now, so this is, if you want to have a look at it for a minute, this is the structure that we use when we teach a reading or a listening lesson. So there are different points, different key elements, let's say. I would say I'll go from the beginning, okay? So the very first step is to contextualize your lesson, give it a context. If your lesson is about food science, like a couple of you told me, you teach food science, or history, what is good I think a good habit would be to, if you can, and you might already do this, I'm not sure, to bring in maybe an object or something that relates to the lesson you're going to teach. Okay, so you're teaching food science. I'm not really sure what do you do when you teach food science, but let's say you're teaching something about, I don't know, food that goes off, for example. You can bring in, I don't know, a big pumpkin, a gone off pumpkin, and you can show the mold and everything else. Okay, that will stick into your student's mind. Okay, I appreciate the fact that you teach a large number of students, so your classes are not like the classes we have, where we have 10, 15 students. You teach like 25 students or 30 students probably, so it's a bit more difficult. So maybe you can bring in 2 or 3 objects, okay, so that they are visible to everyone. If it's feasible, you can tell your students, you know, kind of pass them on so the students can see that and actually touch it, okay? And that's a way for them to kind of get ready for the topic of the session. So that's the contextualization, okay? So you have to give it a context to give it a topic, and that's the first thing you do. The second stage here is pre-teaching of vocabulary. Okay, so now here it depends on whether you are teaching English or you are teaching a subject. If you're teaching English and you're doing, as I said, a reading or a listening lesson, then the vocabulary that you pre-teach at this stage is the vocabulary in the text in English that you think is difficult for your students to understand, or might be difficult for them to understand. This depends obviously on the level of your class, on the material you're using. It depends on many things. So it is your job to identify those 5, 6 difficult words that you think your students need to know before they read or listen. Again, it depends on the level. If it's a low-level class, if it's elementary, pre-intermediate, I would teach a maximum of 4 words. If it's a higher level, upper intermediate, for example, I would probably teach 6 to 8 new words from the text or from the listening script. So you decide, okay, you're the teacher and you know, okay, so my class might not know these words. Okay, let's take these words out of context and put them on the board, or do some kind of exercise in which they will know the meaning before they look at the text or at the script. Okay. Right, the next step is global comprehension task. So again, we go back to the task. So you have to give your students a reason to read or to listen to a piece, okay? So what's the task here is to basically understand generally the text is talking about or what the people are talking about, okay? If you use a course book, the course book will have let's say a question that is kind of general, you know, a general comprehension question for that text or that piece, and that's fine. If you're not using a course book, if you're using your own material, let's say you're teaching food science like Emanuele, right? Yes. And you have your own material and it's not in English, or it is in English, but it's not structured for an English language lesson, then in that case, read the text or listen to the script, listen to the piece, and then decide, just formulate, you know, make a general question for them to answer. Okay? But the first listening we do, or the first reading we do, is normally because we want to understand generally what the text is about. Okay? Then we have a second listening. So normally when we read or we listen to a piece, we read the text, we normally do it twice at least. Okay? Now, English language teachers, if you're preparing your students for IELTS, that's a different thing, okay? Because in IELTS, we don't approach the IELTS listening or reading in that way. But if it's general English you're teaching, then we normally plan for 2 readings or 2 listenings at least. You can have a third and a fourth if you want to, no problem. So the first one is a general reading and listening. The second one is a detailed reading and listening. So it's a comprehension task that wants the student to go and look for details. Details might be names, dates, description of something, I don't know, historical happenings or something like that. Okay, it depends on what you're teaching. Yes. Now, if you look at what is in between the two tasks, you will see that there is something that you should be doing between the first and the second task. Okay, so normally, as I said, okay, for each task you have a question. The first task is normally general, and it's one question about, okay, what are they talking about, or what is the text about? Before you check with everyone as class feedback, you should allow your students to check their answers with each other. If they are, if you're teaching a large class, then maybe put them in groups. Okay, so this is the question: what is the guy in the listening piece talking about? Once the listening piece is finished, once you stop it, then your students should check with each other if they've answered the question or questions correctly. Okay, if they have the same answer, basically. Okay, they check with each other, and then they check with you as a class. Okay, so these are normally the 3 steps. So you listen, read, students check with each other, and then there is a class feedback. These are the 3 steps for each reading, for each listening you do. Now you will ask me, why should the students check with each other? I'm the teacher, I know the answer, they should check with me. It's because we want the students to be a bit more independent, a bit more responsible about their learning. We want shyer students, or students who might understand a bit less because the level of English is lower, to get a bit more confident. Okay, so maybe checking directly with the teacher might be a problem. Because they don't feel confident enough, because they don't know the answer, because they weren't listening, or because they didn't really understand. Because, in a class like yours, you have different levels of English, and, they might not want to check with you directly. So they check with each other, they know each other, and they kind of support each other in that way. Okay, it's also good for, kind of making them a bit more responsible, because that's what they have to do. They have to listen and depend on their own understanding instead of always kind of waiting for the teacher to tell them the answer. So that's a useful thing to do. I don't know whether you do it already or not. You might already be doing it, which is really good. Now, again, okay, so if you look at the second task, so the detailed comprehension task, it might be difficult, so you might have to listen to the piece again, you might have to read the text again, which is fine, okay? So I would say for a reading or listening lesson, at least 2 readings or 2 listenings. So if you want, you can do more. Now, at this point, you have two options. You have language work, or you have a speaking or writing activity. You can actually do both if you want. Okay, you can do a language work first and then a speaking and writing activity. That is going to take you a long time though. So I think most of you teach for about an hour. I mean, the lessons you teach are about an hour long. So all this will not fit in an hour. Okay, so in an hour, you might be able to do the two readings or the two listenings and maybe a short speaking activity or a short writing activity. You won't be able to do language work and a productive activity. So you might want to leave the speaking or writing activity, maybe the writing activity, for the following lesson or for the lesson you have with them the following day or the following week. You can do that, okay? And that could be a writing activity, and we can look at how to structure a writing activity. Language work, okay, language work takes a while because you have to kind of focus on either the vocabulary or the grammar that is presented in the listening piece or in the text. So you have to identify which grammar you want to highlight and you want your students to notice, or you have to identify the words, the vocabulary, the expressions you want your students to notice and to be able to use. So that will take a while. That will take a good, I think, 20 minutes to do. By the time you identify, you explain what it is, and you give them some exercises to do, whether they are written or spoken. It depends. So yes, so it takes a while, but this is pretty much the structure of a reading and a listening lesson. What else did I want to say? Yes. Now you will ask me, I mean, do we approach a reading and a listening lesson in the same way? Are they the same thing? They're not exactly, because of different reasons. So there are differences between a reading lesson and a listening lesson. And these are the main differences. Okay. Yeah, fine. They came with you. Okay. Right. So we've got 6 different reasons here. The first one is pace issues. Pace is kind of the rhythm of the lesson, the rhythm you give to a lesson. So a listening lesson might be a bit shorter. Okay. Because everyone has to listen to the same listening piece, and the listening piece will take, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes, and that's the length of the listening piece. Within, whereas if you give if it's a reading lesson, every single student will take a different time to read a set text. What you can do, you can set the time. You can say, okay, you have to read this text within 5 minutes. I'll give you 5 minutes to read this text and to find this or this information, for example. But the pace changes according to whether it's a reading or a listening lesson. So that is something that you should take into account. If you if you want to kind of plan your lesson and you say, oh, okay, a listening lesson will take me less time than a reading lesson. That is something that you need to kind of bear in mind. The other thing is, just a second, I'm going to get my notes, otherwise I get lost. Here we are. Yes. Vocabulary issues. So yes, students are more likely. It's easier for students to notice difficult vocabulary if they are reading something. Okay, if they're listening, they normally listen to. They will understand the listening piece better because the difficult words, they will just not listen to the difficult words. They will listen to the main idea. Okay, whereas if they have a text, one reason a reading lesson will take you longer is because students will stop at every difficult word they find, or not just difficult, but unknown word that they find. That's why it is advisable for you to pre-teach some vocabulary. So to teach, to extract those 3 or 4 words and say, oh, this is what this means, this is what this means, this is what this means. So they don't get stuck, they don't stop when they're reading. I think it's important, though, that they don't stop anyway when they're reading a text. It will just make everything difficult. They need to get the gist of what they're reading. They need to get the general idea of what they're reading. They shouldn't stop at each word they don't know. That is something that they can do for homework, for example, analyze every single word. That's fine. It takes time, and they can do it with a dictionary, and they can do it at their own pace, no problem. But in class, you have to stick to your plan, to say, okay, this is what we're reading, and out of that, I take something that I want you to use. Okay, production is very important at the end of a reading or a listening lesson. So you don't want to spend too much time analyzing every word. Number 3, equipment issues. So if you're reading if you're doing a reading lesson, what you need is a handout, which is easy to get. You photocopy something, or they have their own book, which is fine. With listening lessons, you have to have the equipment that works for that. Okay, so I don't know what happens in your school. You might have, the latest technology helping you carrying out your lessons, which is fine. But if you don't, then it's a problem. Okay, so, or you are listening to something online and the internet connection is not fantastic, you might lose the video, it kind of stops halfway through. You don't really want that. So you have to think about these 2 things as well. Number 4 is the challenge for the teacher. Okay. A reading lesson is a challenge for the teacher because it becomes boring teacher, no. Okay, listening is much more lively because you might be watching a video, or you might be listening to a song and so on. So it's much more lively, whereas a reading lesson might get boring. But the students might feel it's boring because, it takes a lot of their energy. So yes, that's the other challenge, and that's one of the differences. The panic factor, I'm not sure, I don't know, it depends on your students really. It's about listening lessons. So you might be listening to a dialogue, or maybe a clip from a film, and watching it as well, and students don't understand at all what is being said. For teachers who do, teachers who teach food sciences or history and so on, you might be looking at, I don't know, a lecture, maybe a video from a lecture or something like that, and that is terrifying if you don't know, if you don't know the terminology and you don't know what they are talking about. So the panic factor is linked to listening lessons. So that's something you have to take into account. If the students panic, maybe not panic totally, but they start kind of talking to their classmate, and it becomes chaos. They don't understand. They start chatting and all that. No, you don't want that. Okay, so in that case, you would have to choose a clip or a listening piece that you think most of the students can understand. Okay, so the language level has to be suitable to most of the students in your class. Number 6, receptive pronunciation issues. This is linked to, say, the panic factor. So, this is what happens here. I'm not sure, you might experience it, you might not. If you're teachers of English and you use different course books, you will know that some listening pieces are, they present dialogues of people with that have different accents. So you might have an Australian speaker, you might have an Indian speaker, you might have a Portuguese speaker or a German speaker, or an American speaker, and so on. So there's interference from their first language that will make their English sound a bit different. Which is fine, because this is what we have to deal with every day. Okay, people speaking English and people who speak English, who come from different parts of the world and speak English with their own accent, which is fantastic. But we need to kind of train English language learners to understand those accents. So one of the problems you might have in a listening lesson is that of the accents. Okay. There is no real solution to that. You just have to expose your students to as many accents as possible so that they can recognize the slight differences. That's it. Okay, so these are kind of, the most important differences of our of this type of lesson. And okay, so I just wanted to kind of go on to the next slide about ideas that things that you can do with your students in your lessons. Again, this can apply to an English language lesson, and it can apply to any other topic, okay, any other subject. So if you're teaching a subject and you want to teach it in English, or you want to teach some of it in English, not the whole thing, then you can use one of these ideas, or maybe all of them. The first one is jigsaw reading. Jigsaw reading, I don't know whether you know what a jigsaw is. It's one of those, I think in Italy, you call them puzzles. And they are those images that are kind of printed on a large format, and then they are broken into pieces, and then what you get, you buy a box with lots of pieces, and you have to put the pieces together to recreate the picture. Okay, so jigsaw reading is similar to that. What you have is you have different students reading different texts. So what they do, they have to kind of combine the texts by talking to each other to recreate the whole picture. Okay, it could be like a text that you have divided into 3, and the text is about I don't know, the discovery of America in 1492. Okay, so let's say every group of students reads text A, text B, and text C, and then they have to kind of go together and recreate the whole text by talking to each other and answering it, and answering questions. Okay, so they recreated the text. So what comes first, comes second, what comes third, and so on. Or it could be a text about, a famous person or something like that. The good thing about this this type of activity is that students work together. It's very student-centered. Okay, students work together. They don't need a teacher there to tell them what to do. You just give the instructions, and then they work together, and hopefully get something out of it. Okay, and hopefully communicate in English. Okay. Idea number 2 is a tape script gap fill. Okay, so you, for example, as we do here, you listen to a song and you give your students a script of the song, and you listen to a song, and then you have to fill in the gaps with the words that are missing. So you have to listen very carefully for that. It could be, you know, a video that you're watching, a clip from a film or whatever else, and you give them the script, and they have to listen out for the words that are missing. One thing about this type of activity, make sure you you know why you are creating the gaps. Okay, so the words that are in the gap must be kind of important for the rest of your lesson. So you might want to, from the script, from a text script, you might want to delete verbs or adjectives or, I don't know, expressions that are repeated, things like that. And that will then be the language point you teach in your lesson. If you're teaching a subject lesson, so if you're teaching, again, history or food science, maybe delete the words that you want to teach in that lesson. It could be vocabulary, you know, it could be specific vocabulary for that subject that you want your students to know or to learn in that lesson. The third idea is dictation. I love dictation, okay? It is an old-fashioned activity. I think my mum used to do it when I was at school. You know, the teacher used to do it with her, my grandmother certainly. But it's not something that we do nowadays. I don't know whether you guys do it in your classes. But it's quite interesting, and it keeps students on their toes, okay? Especially if it's done, you know, live, it's done by you, it's live there. They don't know what you're going to say, you know, they don't know. This could be something that you do even like without introducing the subject. Okay, so you walk in, you say, okay, piece of paper, everyone, pen, just write down what I'm saying, okay? And you read out, I don't know, a piece of text or something, and they have to write it down. You could also use it as a dictogloss. So what happens is that you have maybe a very short text, and maybe just some sentences that you read out loud quickly the first time. Okay, so they don't have much time to understand everything and to write everything down. Okay, so you read it out loud and you say, oh, I hope to go to Japan soon. I'm very excited about seeing Mount Fuji, blah, blah, blah. Okay, 5 or 6 sentences like that. And you read them out loud quickly, and then you give them a minute or two to write down what they remember. Once you've done that, they can kind of work together, okay, 3 or 4, you know, a small group together. Then you say it again, and you say it a bit more slowly. And they will recreate the text. Basically, this activity finishes once the text is recreated completely. But it's very good. It's a very good listening exercise for them, and it's also good because they can work together and they can ask each other, and so on. So I've given you kind of 3 ideas. There are many other ideas that I can kind of talk about, or maybe what I can do, I can send you like a handout with all the ideas that we've got, things that we do here, and so on. So the last thing is just for you to think about which one of these ideas would you like to try out in your lessons. You can think about and see whether they are, you know, it's feasible for you to try this out or not. Don't worry about the second question because it's not just seeing this. It's not related to the course, don't worry. So which ideas would you like to try out in your classes? And why? Okay. Now, what you could do, now, what time is it? It's 20 to 2. I'd say maybe we can have like a 5-minute Q&A if you're interested, if you want to type any questions, any requests, if you have any, anything to ask, anything is unclear, or if you have any ideas that you want to share with everyone else, or with me really, because you know each other, so you can see each other at work and talk about this with each other. Let me just go and see if I can grab my chat. Where's the chat? Down there. Okay. So yes, if you have any questions, let me know. Just type them quickly in the chat so I can see them, or anything to say, any ideas you have, and so on. In the meantime, what I wanted to say is this. Going back to the key elements in a reading and listening lesson, I was in a conference a couple of years ago, and one of the speakers there kind of criticized the second stage of a reading lesson, which is the pre-teaching of vocabulary. This teacher claimed that, and it's true in a way, claimed that normally when we listen to something, we read something. When we read something, it's okay, but when we listen to someone, we can never listen twice. So unless it's a recording, or it's a video, it's a film or something like that. But when you're having a conversation, you cannot ask someone to say, "Oh, can you please teach me these 3 or 4 words you are going to tell me later because I don't understand them." So this teacher kind of criticized that second stage of the lesson, saying that it's not something that we should do, something that we should present. The pre-teaching should not happen. This is up to you. I think it's up to the teacher to understand if you need to present certain words to your students in advance so they understand better or not. It's up to you. It's your decision. It depends on how confident you are in teaching. It depends on the level of your students. So yes, really, it's down to you to decide whether you want to use the second stage, whether you want to pre-teach some words or not. Very good. Okay. I don't think there are any questions, right? No, very good. Okay, so thank you very much for joining us today. I am going to send you slides of this presentation so you have it and you can follow it if you want to do a reading or listening lesson in your class. What we're going to do tomorrow is teaching speaking. So elements of teaching speaking, how to motivate students, how to kind of get them to speak and so on. What do we talk about? How we assess speaking and so on. And then on Thursday, we'll see how it goes. Okay, it could be something related to CLIL. So how you integrate English in a CLIL lesson. Okay, so what do I teach in English? What do I teach in Italian in this case, or in your first language? It could be something related to teaching techniques. I still have to decide that. Okay, well, thank you very much, and I'll see you tomorrow again at 3 o'clock Italian time, so 2 p.m. UK time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.